these days, when we say efficiency, people are talking about speed. It has nothing to do with efficacy. The meaning of efficiency has already been changed. So I think this constant drive for speed, getting things done faster, I don't quite see the point. And in the process, you lose all the richness. Already in the earlier panel, they spoke about, empathy, trying to get empathy from a machine so that you don't have to pay the costs. Because, when you care about someone, there's some cost involved. You have to make a fuss about that person's problem, you have to show up. If you remove all of that out, there is no human connection. So I think this is where I think watching out for language is really crucial, because by the time you get to a point where we, without blinking our eyes, use these terms to machine, it's too late. So that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you so much. Finally, Jinpa.
Good morning. It's a real joy to be part of this amazing panel, and my job has been made easy by my colleagues who have presented so rich kind of content already. My name is Thupten Jinpa. I've had the privilege to be His Holiness's principal translator for nearly 40 years now. And in that role, I also happen to be one of the few people now who has been part of Minor Life since it began. So it's a real joy to be in this conference as well. My presentation will be coming more from the Buddhist perspective, I'll be speaking, in relation to narrative, I'll be speaking mostly about a few things. One is I want to invoke the principle of interdependence, which is a key principle in Buddhism, which is a key explanatory principle. And then I also want to kind of talk about what I see as a slippery slope of language in relation to AI and automation. And then I also want to talk about, one of the big debates that is going to come out of all of this is the nature of consciousness. How do we define consciousness? I want to bring the Buddhist perspective on that. And then I want to conclude by returning to compassion, because in the end, compassion has to be factored in. Because otherwise, why would we even invent something if it is not for humanity? So that's the kind of arc of my presentation. But before I get into that, I want to bring everybody's attention to something that I see as really core to any coherent systems of human creation, whether it is community, whether it is society. And there are three things which really need to relate with each other, and I will call it the trio. So can I have the first slide? Yeah. So in almost every systems of ethics, whether religious or non-religious, humanistic, Buddhist, there's a recognition of an important relationship between knowledge and power on the one side and responsibility on the other. So the sign in the middle is therefore sign, which is a kind of a logical notation. Now, one of the most worrying aspects of the technology, the digital technology, and we saw that in the social media phenomenon and increasingly the AI industry, is really the connection between the knowledge and power on the one hand and responsibility on the other. Either there is no acknowledgement of responsibility, or it's very fuzzy and confused, and they're part of that fuzziness is based upon a claim that this is a very infant technology. It's in the process of a growth. If we don't allow to do it, other countries and nations will take over. We are more liberal democratic values. We can be trusted. So there is all of that. So the responsibility is being shirked. And those of us who care about the future of humanity, like those in the room here, our job is to constantly remind those in the position of power and knowledge in creating this technology, their responsibility. That, I think, is a crucial role we can all play. And now, in order to understand the responsibility, you need to really understand the principle of interdependence. Because, in other words, implications and impacts of what is being done. I, for one, believe that the emergence of AI today, partly a function of the increasing power of computation, machines and cloud systems, and all of this has really allowed this acceleration. And I'm not quite sure, whether I fully agree with you, Emily, whether this is yet another sophisticated level of automation, or whether there is a new reality that is emerging. I'm not quite sure yet. So in any case, a new reality is being created, and it's being created by a powerful forces with majority of us, 99.5% or 99.9% of us, we don't have a really say in this reality that is being created, which is going to, increasingly, when you open the computer up, AI application is being thrust upon us, and then often you don't see the, button that says switch it off. It's being shoved down under our throat, into our throat. So we are forced to live in this reality. If that is the case, then as consumers, as users, it's our responsibility to remind the responsibility. And for that, I think the implications, whether it is socio-economic implications, which is what worries me most, actually, the job losses and all of that, and who's going to be responsible for redressing that imbalance that is going to be created. There's a huge amount of implications. I think our job, whether it is philosophers, scientists, humanities scholars, or psychologists, our job is to remind constantly, shout, to really bring up this. So now the slippery slope is what worries me more in the immediate. So these are words that are being used already in relation to machine intelligence, memory, language, and even thinking machines. So a lot of people are not bothered when these terms are being applied to machines. Now, there are other terms which are increasingly, gradually being appropriated, which is troublesome. Desire, intention, autonomy, or in philosophical language, we will call it free will, and sense of self. The fact that they're choosing to use first-person pronouns is in a kind of a implicit, sort of surreptitious way of getting into personhood, into the machine. Perception, emotions like the chatbot is trying to, mimic human emotions, being empathetic. And some of the early ones are very psychopathic. It always praises you. Oh, you are a genius. You are great. All of this. And then I see another set of terms which are even more important. There's mind, awareness, consciousness, and sentience. So I see those in a separate category. So yesterday, His Eminence Khyentse Rinpoche already told us a little bit about the problem of consciousness in English versus the Tibetan term that we have. But here also, I do want to bring attention to the researchers and philosophers as well, that especially the term consciousness, we need to be very careful about what we are talking about. Because even in science of consciousness at the moment is in its infancy stage. And often when scientists talk about consciousness, they're talking about this aha moment. When is the first instant the person becomes conscious of something? That is not what Buddhism means by consciousness. So I think it's important, and the most important term in all of this is, for me, sentience. And sentience, we should never cross that line. We are going to attribute sentience to a machine. And the reason why it's a slippery slope is language matters. Once we start attributing these terms to machine, we get used to it, and Wittgenstein is right. The meaning of a word is its use. You will get to a point where it'll be too late to redefine these terms, since these terms would have been already misappropriated. And what happens is the two process. On the one side, the machines get more and more kind of anthropomized, with the attributions of human, attributes. And in the process, at the same time, the humans get devalued. So the net result is a horrible situation where, we don't know. We'll be confused about how to feel the other person next to you. I mean, that is a bleak scenario we'll be moving to. And we know from history, when humans dehumanize another human being, we are capable of horrific things. I mean, this is, well established by history. So this is something that I worry. And there are a lot of people here. There are also people from the, who are more direct, closer to the actual action of creating these machines in this room as well. I would like to really draw attention to that, Now, roughly, the Buddhist theory of consciousness, so when I say consciousness, it's not in the sense in which Western scientists mean at the moment. This is this broader underlying capacity for awareness. This is a model from a 7th century and 5th century Dignaga, and followed up by 7th century Dharmakirti. So essentially, the underlying reality of consciousness is really recognized as this subjectivity. This is what Western philosophers call qualia, what it is feel like to be someone. So that pure experience is the subjectivity, and phenomenally it manifests in two aspects. One is the object orientation, which is content related. You can access, where your objects turn into a content. And then the other one is the reflexive part. It's not reflective, it's reflexive, and it's simultaneous to the actual act of cognition. So I would argue that when, so for example, in these three, the computational model could probably capture the intentionality, the object orientation part. But at this point, conceptually, I can't see how the subjectivity and the reflexivity could be captured in a computational model or any theory of consciousness that is AI. And for the benefit of my Tibetan colleagues, where I'm getting these things, I just wanted to put the citations there, so I don't need to read this. The point I'm trying to make is that since how AI sort of moves in whatever direction, where the debate on the consciousness lands matters a lot to entire humanity. I think the resources that should be tapped into should not be confined just to Western, kind of dominant Western ideas. And particularly when it comes to, nature of mind and consciousness, Buddhism is really rich. And to ignore that would be a tremendous loss, not just for the Buddhists, but for the entire humanity. So that's a main point I'm trying to raise. Now, in the end, I think all of this has to be underpinned by compassion. And compassion is a tricky word because we tend to use compassion primarily in concrete terms of an individual human's feeling towards another human being. But compassion can also be attributed to a kind of a systems or society where compassion can be taken as a standpoint from which we see things, which view things. So, and one of the important aspects of that in a system or a society is that any system that is compassionate needs to have a mindset where a special attention is being paid to the vulnerable. And that is a fundamental requirement of a system that is compassionate. And then compassion is also one of the most powerful moral anchor. If you're confused what to do, what is the right thing, ask what is the most compassionate thing to do here. And it should be a guiding principle. It also should be in terms of measurement of evaluating whether it's going on the right direction or the wrong direction. Compassion should play an important role. And it's also the best guarantor that whatever is being created is in the service of humanity. So to conclude, to sum up, I talked about knowledge, power, and responsibility, the principle of interdependence as key to appreciating that responsibility, slippery slope of language, particular role of consciousness from the Buddhist perspective, and the primacy of compassion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinpa. We are going to take a 10-minute break now, so I would invite everyone to stand up. And we will reconvene in exactly 10 minutes from now.
Thank you. My own sense is that, I do a lot of translation work. I do a lot of translation work because of the translating for His Holiness, but also I do a lot of textual translation from. So I think a lot about language. So I think, going back to the slippery slope of language, I think we should never cross the divide between machine and humans. And this is where I think this whole direction of conscious AI and all of that, person, AI as a person, all of this is very, very dangerous. So I think whatever we do, we have to make sure. And then sometimes the technology gives us a false promise that, already the boosters are saying that we are going to get into utopia, but we know from history, even though the technologies makes us more efficient, it doesn't give us more leisure time. There's a Tibetan saying, I bought a horse so that I will have more leisure time, but it takes me more time to look after the horse, kind of thing. So technology is always shifting the goalpost. So I think we should not be too kind of fascinated and taken away by this efficiency language. And efficiency, these days, when we say efficiency, people are talking about speed. It has nothing to do with efficacy. The meaning of efficiency has already been changed. So I think this constant drive for speed, getting things done faster, I don't quite see the point. And in the process, you lose all the richness. Already in the earlier panel, they spoke about, empathy, trying to get empathy from a machine so that you don't have to pay the costs. Because, when you care about someone, there's some cost involved. You have to make a fuss about that person's problem, you have to show up. If you remove all of that out, there is no human connection. So I think this is where I think watching out for language is really crucial, because by the time you get to a point where we, without blinking our eyes, use these terms to machine, it's too late. So that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you so much. Let's give a hand to our panelists.